A neighborhood security guard draws a gun on a black woman for no reason, but when she pulls out her badge, his entire life falls apart. Wait until you hear who she really is. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Alicia Moore, dressed in a simple tracksuit, returned home from her evening jog. She lived in a gated community on the outskirts of Atlanta, where homeowners were known for strict rules and a notoriously overbearing HOA. Alicia, however, had never had any problems until tonight. As she swiped her keycard at the gate, a man in a security uniform stepped forward abruptly, blocking her path. He looked her up and down with suspicion. "Can I help you?" Alicia asked, her voice calm but firm. "Identification," the guard barked. His hand rested on his holster and his eyes narrowed. "You don't belong here." Alicia frowned. She had lived in the community for nearly 5 years, yet this man spoke to her as though she were a trespasser. "I live here," she replied, pulling out her access card. "You can check the system." But instead of checking, the so-called security officer sneered. "Don't play games with me. I've been told to watch for suspicious people." "You fit the description." The words cut deep. Suspicious, because she was black. When Alicia took a step forward, his hand twitched. In a shocking move, he drew his gun and pointed it at her chest. A hush fell over the evening air. The world seemed to freeze. Joggers across the street stopped in their tracks. Neighbors peeked out their windows, shocked at the sight of a supposed guard aiming a weapon at an unarmed woman. What no one knew, not the guard, not the onlookers, was that Alicia Moore wasn't just a jogger. She was a high-ranking FBI tactical commander, and this man had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The afternoon sun hung low over the gated community as Danielle pulled her SUV into the neighborhood she had just moved into. The manicured lawns and pristine sidewalks gave the impression of safety, but Danielle's instincts told her otherwise. She had dealt with too many cases in her FBI career to believe appearances. As she parked near her home, a man in a dark uniform marked HOA security stepped into the middle of the street, waving her down aggressively. His nameplate read B. Keller, and his hand hovered far too close to the holstered weapon on his hip. "Ma'am, this is private property," Keller barked, squinting at her like she didn't belong. "I need to see some ID. People like you don't just come in here without permission." Danielle calmly lowered her window, her voice steady but firm. "I live here. Just moved in 2 days ago. You'll see my name on the resident list." Keller smirked, ignoring her explanation. "Lady, don't play games with me. You don't look like someone who belongs here. Step out of the car now." Danielle's jaw tightened, but she stayed composed. Years of tactical training taught her to assess threats without escalating. Still, the man's hand inching closer to his weapon was impossible to ignore. Neighbors peeked through blinds, whispering, but no one came forward. "Mr. Keller," Danielle said slowly, "I strongly suggest you back up. Drawing that weapon will be the worst mistake of your life." But Keller, blinded by arrogance and prejudice, only sneered. "Is that a threat?" he spat. Danielle's eyes narrowed. She wasn't just defending herself, she was calculating every possible outcome. What Keller didn't know was that she wasn't a scared civilian. She was an FBI tactical commander, trained to end standoffs before they began. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was the beginning of a war Keller had no idea he'd started. Samantha had barely taken 2 steps closer to her car when the situation escalated. One of the HOA security guards, an overly muscular man with a shaved head and sunglasses, suddenly pulled a handgun from his holster and aimed it directly at her. The metallic click of the weapon being readied froze the entire street. Mothers pulling strollers stopped in their tracks, neighbors peeked from behind their blinds, and a teenager filming on his phone whispered, "Oh my God, he's got a gun on her." Samantha raised her hands slowly, her face calm though her heart thudded with controlled adrenaline. Years of tactical training taught her never to show fear, even when staring down the barrel of a weapon. "You don't want to do this," she said evenly, her voice carrying the weight of authority without revealing her true position. But the guard, clearly feeling the false power of the moment, sneered. "Lady, don't move. You don't belong here. One wrong step and you'll regret it." His finger hovered dangerously close to the trigger. The other 2 guards shifted nervously, unsure whether to support him or back off. One muttered, "Man, put it down. She's not resisting." But the lead guard ignored him, drunk on his authority. Samantha scanned the situation in seconds. The guard's stance was sloppy, his grip too tight, betraying inexperience. She knew if he fired, it wouldn't be precision, it would be chaos. A neighbor's voice rang out from across the street. "That's enough. She's done nothing wrong." But the guard only barked back, "Stay out of this." Inside, Samantha weighed her options. She could disarm him in less than 3 seconds, but doing so publicly would expose who she really was. Instead, she chose restraint. For now. Little did the guard know, every move he made was sealing his own fate. Angela Carter's breath caught in her throat as the cold, metallic glint of the handgun reflected the faint light from the lamppost. The self-proclaimed HOA security guard, a burly man in his 40s named Dennis Crowley, had his weapon leveled directly at her chest. His finger twitched near the trigger, his face twisted with authority he didn't truly have. "Hands where I can see them," Dennis barked, his voice echoing through the otherwise peaceful suburban street. Angela, her gym bag still slung across her shoulder, didn't flinch. Years of tactical training in high-pressure situations had drilled into her the importance of remaining calm. "I live here," Angela said evenly, her voice controlled. "You're making a mistake." But Dennis wasn't listening. His ego swelled with the illusion of power. "Don't lie to me. You don't belong in this neighborhood. You people always say the same thing." His words dripped with prejudice, and Angela instantly recognized the dangerous combination, fear mixed with arrogance. Behind them, curtains began to move. Neighbors peeked through blinds, whispering, but no one stepped forward. They watched the drama unfold, content to remain hidden. Angela's heart pounded, but not from fear. Instead, a sharp anger simmered beneath her composure. She had faced armed suspects, hostile criminals, and even life-or-death missions overseas. Yet here she was, in her own neighborhood, being threatened by a man with no badge, no authority, and no respect. "You're trespassing," Dennis growled, inching closer. His voice cracked with false bravado, betraying his insecurity. "If you don't get down on your knees, I'll make sure you never cause trouble again." Angela's eyes narrowed, her tactical instincts already calculating distance, weapon angle, and possible outcomes. She knew one wrong move could turn this into tragedy. But she also knew something Dennis didn't. He had just pulled a gun on the last person he should ever underestimate. Tanya's patience had nearly worn out. She had given this so-called security officer every chance to de-escalate the situation, but Marcus seemed determined to push it further. His hand lingered dangerously close to his holstered weapon, his posture screaming hostility. "Ma'am, last warning," Marcus barked, his voice sharp enough to draw stares from residents peeking through their windows. "Step out of the vehicle now, or I'll consider you a threat." Tanya's jaw tightened. She could feel the humiliation burning inside her, but she knew better than to let anger cloud her judgment. Instead, she kept her tone calm and controlled. "I've told you who I am, I've given you my identification, and I've explained why I'm here. You're escalating something that doesn't need to escalate." But Marcus wasn't listening. His ego was in full command. "You think you can talk down to me?" he sneered. "Not in this neighborhood. Around here we do things by the rules." The irony wasn't lost on Tanya. He was the one breaking every rule of proper conduct. A few more residents had stepped outside, some recording the confrontation with their phones. She could see their curiosity mixed with unease. Then, in a move that made Tanya's instincts flare, Marcus unfastened the strap on his gun holster. The unmistakable click echoed like a warning bell. Tanya took a slow breath, her FBI training kicking in. "You're making a mistake," she said firmly, locking eyes with him. "And it's one you can't take back." Marcus smirked, mistaking her calm for fear. "We'll see about that." Little did he know, he was seconds away from finding out exactly who he was messing with. The air outside grew heavier with each passing second. Tasha's training taught her to stay calm, but even patience had its limits. She kept her hands visible, her tone steady, yet her eyes burned with controlled authority. "Sir, I've told you 3 times. I live here. You're making a mistake," she said, her voice edged with warning. The HOA security guard's grip on the gun didn't loosen. His face twitched with a mix of arrogance and uncertainty, but his pride kept him rooted. Neighbors, now gathered on porches and sidewalks, began whispering nervously. Phones were out, recording everything. "Don't you raise your voice at me," he snapped, trying to assert dominance. "You people are always causing trouble in this neighborhood." The words hit the crowd like a slap. Murmurs grew louder. A woman gasped audibly. Tasha's jaw tightened. She wasn't just dealing with ignorance, she was staring into the face of racism cloaked in false authority. Still, she gave him one last chance. I advise you, put that weapon down, right now. You don't know who you're pointing it at. But he smirked, mistaking her calm for weakness. And who exactly do you think you are? At that moment, the sharp wail of a police siren cut through the night. Red and blue lights flashed against the houses, painting the scene in chaos. The HOA guard stiffened but didn't lower his gun, desperate to prove himself before real officers arrived. Tasha's lips curled into the faintest smile. Reinforcements were here, but not the kind he expected. For the first time that evening, the balance of power was about to shift, and the guard had no idea how badly his night was about to unravel. Dan tightened his grip on the pistol, his knuckles pale as the gun stayed aimed at Jordan's chest. His voice grew louder, drawing the attention of a few other HOA members who had wandered into the lobby. This is private property. You people think you can just walk in here, but not on my watch. Jordan didn't flinch. Her years of tactical training had taught her to remain calm under pressure. She lifted her chin and spoke with steady authority. Lower the weapon, right now. You're escalating a situation that doesn't exist. I've done nothing wrong. But Dan sneered, mistaking her composure for defiance. You think you can order me around? I'm security here. You don't belong. If you don't move, I'll... His threat trailed off as Jordan's sharp gaze locked onto his. Jordan's tone sharpened. Do you realize what you're doing? Pointing a firearm at an unarmed civilian without cause? That's a felony. Put it down before you ruin your life. By now, whispers rippled through the small crowd. Neighbors fidgeted, unsure whether to intervene. One older woman muttered, "This doesn't look right. She hasn't even done anything." But Dan ignored them, drunk on power. Jordan's patience thinned. Her eyes scanned the room. Exit points, witnesses, potential cover. Instinctively, her training kicked in. She wasn't just a victim here, she was assessing, calculating, waiting for the moment she would need to act. Then, with deliberate calm, she reached into her purse, not for a weapon, but for her badge. Slowly, she lifted the leather case and flipped it open. The golden emblem gleamed under the lobby light. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Tactical Operations Commander Jordan Miles. The entire room fell silent. Dan froze, his expression flickering between disbelief and panic. His hand trembled. For the first time, the power shifted, and Jordan was in complete control. Word of the confrontation spread like wildfire across the neighborhood. By the following morning, residents were buzzing with mixed opinions. Some were horrified by Derek's reckless actions. Pulling a gun on a woman walking home was beyond the pale. Others, however, defended him, insisting he was just doing his job to keep the community safe. The division among neighbors created tension that hadn't existed before. At a small cafe near the community entrance, a heated debate broke out. An elderly couple whispered about how Derek had always been a bit too eager to show authority. A younger resident argued loudly that his behavior put everyone in danger. Meanwhile, a few of Derek's staunch supporters doubled down, claiming that if the woman had nothing to hide, she should have complied without question. Maya, however, remained silent about her true identity. She knew speaking out too soon would derail her larger plan to expose Derek for the liability he truly was. Instead, she quietly observed how quickly fear and prejudice could fracture a community. To her, this wasn't just about one man with a gun. It was about a deeper sickness of mistrust that had been festering beneath the surface. That evening, Maya received a discreet message from her FBI contacts. They had already gathered preliminary intelligence on Derek, a history of complaints filed against him during his previous private security jobs, none of which had ever stuck because of his connections in the HOA board. The message confirmed what Maya suspected. Derek wasn't just a hothead, he was a ticking time bomb. But as Maya looked around her neighborhood and saw the subtle stares, the hushed conversations, and the widening rift between residents, she realized the problem was bigger than Derek alone. This was now about reclaiming safety, trust and respect, in a place where division had begun to take root. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. What had started as a heated confrontation at the gates of Willow Creek had turned into a viral story. Neighbors texted, whispered, and even argued in the community Facebook group. "Did you hear? The new lady, she's with the FBI," someone posted. Others commented in disbelief, no way. That security guy really pointed a gun at her? Marissa's name hadn't been officially released, but it didn't matter. Enough people had witnessed the scene, and rumors spread quickly. Some residents were outraged at the HOA for hiring untrained, reckless security contractors. Others doubled down, defending Darren, saying he was just doing his job. The divide created tension across the community, and for the first time in years, Willow Creek didn't feel like a peaceful suburban haven. Meanwhile, Marissa remained calm. She knew these situations often spiraled out of control once public opinion got involved. Sitting at her kitchen table, she scrolled through the online chatter with a quiet sigh. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from colleagues, superiors, and even local reporters asking for a statement. Darren, on the other hand, was spiraling. His face had been caught on multiple cell phone recordings, and now his reckless decision had become the talk of the town. He paced inside his apartment, furious that his authority was being challenged. Instead of admitting his mistake, he convinced himself he was being set up. Later that day, Marissa received an email from her supervisor at the FBI. "We need to discuss what happened. Media inquiries are piling up. Call me." She knew this was bigger than just her. What happened at that gate wasn't just about her personal rights. It was about systemic issues, power abuse, and a neighborhood culture that had allowed fear and prejudice to fester. And now, it was time to confront it head-on. The air in the HOA community room was thick with tension as Commander Alicia Hayes finally stepped forward. For hours, the board members and neighbors had danced around the truth, acting as though the incident was a minor misunderstanding. But Alicia's sharp gaze silenced the room. "Let's make something very clear," she began, her voice calm but filled with authority. "Pointing a gun at an innocent woman is not a misunderstanding. It is a reckless criminal act." Every head in the room turned. Mr. Green, the HOA president, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while others exchanged nervous glances. Some were embarrassed, others defiant. And then there was the so-called security officer, Thomas Briggs, who sat stiffly in the corner, his arms crossed. "You all trusted an untrained man with a firearm to patrol your community. That alone was irresponsible," Alicia continued. "But what's worse is that he profiled me simply because of my skin color." Her words landed like a hammer. Several residents lowered their heads. A few muttered weak excuses, trying to downplay the seriousness of the act. But Alicia wasn't finished. "You're lucky I didn't call in federal charges that night. Because, in case any of you have forgotten..." She reached into her bag and pulled out her credentials, holding them high for everyone to see. "I am Commander Alicia Hayes, Tactical Operations, FBI." Gasps filled the room. Briggs's face drained of all color as his arrogance melted into fear. "This isn't just about me," Alicia said firmly. "It's about how you treat anyone who looks like me, and I will make sure changes are enforced here. That is not a suggestion, it's a guarantee." For the first time, the room was dead silent, no one daring to challenge her commanding presence. The HOA board sat nervously in their meeting room the next day. The atmosphere was suffocating, every creak of the chair or shuffle of paper echoing louder than it should have. What had once been a group of neighbors who thrived on micromanaging others had suddenly become a collection of frightened individuals, waiting for news they didn't want to hear. Drew sat in the corner, his bravado from before completely shattered. His hands trembled slightly as he tapped the table, but he avoided everyone's eyes. His lawyer had told him to stay quiet, but Drew couldn't help but feel his life was unraveling. On the other side of the neighborhood, Commander Riley prepared her official report. She wrote carefully, every word precise, every detail factual. But even as she wrote, she couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment, not just at Drew's actions, but at the complicity of those around him. This wasn't just about one man with a gun, it was about a culture that had allowed suspicion and racism to fester unchecked. Her phone buzzed. It was her supervisor, confirming a date for Drew's hearing. "We're moving quickly on this," the voice said. "His file is thick, Riley. This wasn't the first time, but it's going to be the last." She exhaled slowly, knowing justice was moving forward. Still, she had a decision to make. Should she attend the HOA meeting scheduled for later that evening? Part of her wanted to stay away. Another part of her knew it was important to face them directly, to make sure they understood the seriousness of what had happened. When evening fell, Riley put on a simple blazer and walked toward the meeting hall. Her presence was going to change everything. The courtroom was packed to capacity, the air heavy with anticipation. Reporters lined the back rows, cameras waiting outside for the verdict. The HOA board members sat stiffly at the defense table, their smug expressions fading with every passing minute. Across from them, Commander Meyer sat with her attorney, shoulders squared, radiating calm authority. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, adjusted her glasses and spoke. "We are here today to determine whether the HOA board and their security contractor violated the civil and constitutional rights of Maya Harris, a resident of Willow Creek." The first witness, a neighbor named Linda, took the stand. Her voice shook as she recounted what she had seen that day. "I was on my porch when I saw Mr. Grayson pointing a gun at Maya. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just trying to get into her house. I've lived here for 10 years, and I've never seen anyone else treated like that." The defense tried to discredit her, but the jury wasn't buying it. Next, the footage from Maya's concealed body cam played on the big screen. The room went silent. The jury watched as Derek's hand trembled while holding the weapon, his words dripping with hostility. "Don't move, or I'll shoot." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The jurors exchanged uneasy glances. The HOA's lawyer attempted to object, but the damage was already done. Maya's attorney stood and delivered a fiery statement. This wasn't security. This was racial profiling, intimidation, and a blatant disregard for a woman's humanity, and it was done to someone who has dedicated her life to protecting this country. The board members shifted nervously, their earlier arrogance melting away. The tide had turned, and it was clear to everyone in the room. Justice was closing in on them. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the verdict was read aloud. Jamal, the HOA security guard who had recklessly drawn his weapon, sat pale-faced at the defense table. The evidence was overwhelming: eyewitness testimonies, body camera footage, and Jordan's calm yet commanding account of the incident. The judge's gavel struck firmly, echoing through the chamber. Jamal was convicted of reckless endangerment, unlawful use of a firearm, and harassment. The HOA board, complicit in their negligence and silence, faced heavy fines and lawsuits that would dismantle their authority. Jordan sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't gloating. This was never about revenge. It was about accountability. For too long, people like Jamal had been given positions of authority with no training, no oversight, and far too much ego. It was only a matter of time before someone got hurt. She made sure today's outcome would set a precedent, not only for this HOA, but communities across the state. After court adjourned, neighbors approached her one by one. Many apologized for staying silent, ashamed of how easily they let fear of confrontation blind them to justice. Jordan's response was steady: silence enables abuse. Never be afraid to stand up for what's right. As she walked out of the courthouse, the press surrounded her, cameras flashing. One reporter shouted, "Commander Hayes, any final words about today's verdict?" She paused, her sharp gaze piercing through the noise. "Justice isn't a privilege," she said firmly. "It's a right, and no one, no matter their position, has the authority to strip it away." With that, Jordan left the cameras behind, her stride steady and strong. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a community had been reminded that power is never above accountability.